what he said. We can go home now, but I'll say, truly, 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 truly. Here's the gift in this community. You all have stories, and I give thanks for that. Last week, Anna and I were in a church that was built in, there they are, 1826, an old wooden church in Vermont that was heated by wood stove. And it was just a beautiful community. I'll say something about it sometime. But anyway, we had to leave because an hour had gone by and the minister didn't start the sermon yet. We're not quite at an hour. I'm just telling you that it was nice to say, oh, these guys can mess up a little bit too, and it's all good. Thank you, William. Thank you for the words and music. Let's pray. What he said, William. What you said, God. May we hear our inner voice come alive in our bodies to change your world. Amen. So Susan Cooper's away, and she leads the Daybreak group that meets Wednesday mornings between 7 and 8. And so 4 of us, including William and 3 others and myself, are taking turns leading. And it was my turn last week. So I got off a plane late Tuesday night and got down the street at 6 o'clock to get to Starbucks. And as I'm walking to this place where about 25 people come between 7 and 8 in the morning, I remember that Susan said, as you come to Daybreak, you're supposed to ask the questions, what do you see as you're getting there? And you invite people in the conversation just to say, what did they see? So as I'm walking down the street, I go by the bars down there, and they've got all these blown up Halloween stuff. That's another whole sermon, how we bought into this big time, hey? But anyway, there was this sign, and it just said, and it's a tombstone, and it says, rest in pieces, right? So I'm walking and thinking, rest in pieces, rest in pieces. Isn't that interesting? And I'm thinking, isn't it funny how we are different pieces that come together like today? We're all different pieces in these pews. And then I began to think about how many times in my life I've fell into pieces. Okay? You know those stories in your life, or when some crisis is happening, you feel like you're picking up the pieces, and how those pieces are part of our bodies and part of our lives, and yet we come to a place like this to be at peace. P-E-A-C-E, peace. Pieces and peace is what we yearn for. And I began to think about this, and I'm thinking, this is like by 6:30, I had all these thoughts. I was like, wow, just pay attention where you're walking and then think about what you saw as you went along. And I began to think about our spiritual journey and thinking about how we all connect to our soul in a different way. There are some people for whom, as William said, the reason is in one way in which the rational process helps to make sense of our faith. For others, they'll say, no, I connect to my soul when I'm kneading bread or painting a picture or listening to music or dance. It's the arts that connect me to my soul. Some will say it has nothing to do with church or a religion or a building. It's actually when I'm in the mountains or by the water, when I'm in creation and see in creation differently. Some will say, no, it's not that at all. It's actually in the breaking of the bread or the pouring of the water and the rituals of life. I saw a guy at Starbucks in his ritual. He said to me this morning, he's sitting at a table with a big, huge New York Times. And I said, great paper, eh? He said, this is my morning ritual, right? Some people, it's reading that paper. For others, it's none of that religious stuff. It's actually, let's walk the talk. And so they're connected deeply in their soul when they're walking in the Pride Parade, or they're walking in a refugee walk, or when they're actually living social justice. That's when they connect to the soul. So for you, like, what is it? Because when I learned this a few years ago, I thought everybody was just like me. And it was my way until I discovered, no, there are several ways, actually, that our souls are nurtured and fed in different pieces coming together in the one whole. If we had time, which we don't, I would say to you, what's most important to you and how do you connect to your soul? What do you do to nourish and feed your soul? And so when I was thinking about this what if, I had to say to myself, we can have all these other things which we discussed other Sundays, the ritual and remembering and risk and all of those things, but there has to be a part of it that really indeed needs to be about this word today, which is our mind. Because so much of bad religion is not using the mind. You can see people not thinking about what they say or do, and it comes out in warped, bad religion. And like William has said, my hope is that when you come through the door, you don't have to check your brain at the door, but you actually engage your brain at the door and in this place. And I'm fully aware that any good religion should mean that we don't have to cross fingers or put our brain aside, but actually actively engage it in our religion. Now, the example that's most evident to me in our church and our tradition was in 1988. In 1988, in the United Church of Canada, a congregation raised the question, can someone who is gay or lesbian be a minister? The church says, I don't know. What do we do about this? And so in 1988, which was the year I was ordained, the very first stepping into ministry was this big question, moving from downtown Toronto to a small hamlet north of Edmonton. And I walk in fresh and they say, we got to deal with this. And I'm thinking, how do we deal and understand this situation as people of faith? And so we used a model called the Wesleyan quadrilateral. John Wesley created it. And what he says, think about this, when you're making a decision as a faithful person, look at these guys in the back row. That is too funny. Adria, oh my gosh, how can I keep going? Look at you guys. Talk about unreasonable. There you go. Now here's the thing. What he said in this is how you make decisions is you have to say, what does Scripture say? So we're looking at gay and lesbian people in this issue. What does the Bible say? And we suddenly realized Jesus didn't say anything. And actually, some of the things that were quoted were actually misquotations. It was about hospitality, not about immorality. So we had to look at the Bible. What did the Bible say? And then we had to say, so what does reason say? What does science tell us? What is science telling us about humans and who we are and how we're created? So we had to look at that. And then we had to look at what's our experience. I remember saying, does anybody here have relations or friends that are gay? And no one said they did or thought they did. And then they have to say, so we've got reason and Scripture. What about tradition? What has the church said over time? And so in this engagement with my fresh new congregation, I just said, what do we know? And one person just said, I don't know, but it's in the Bible and I'm sure it's wrong. And there was another person who spoke about a horrific life experience that had nothing to do with this particular issue. And so as we looked at these four parts of the quadrilateral and pulled them together, we realized that it's so arrogant and ignorant to pick one part but not the whole, or one piece and not the whole. And so we had a series of evenings. I remember one evening in particular, this woman left the church and she said, this is it, I'm not in, I don't believe this, I don't want it, I don't like it. The next week, she comes back into church, she says, I'm on board. I said, what happened? She said, Oprah Winfrey said it was okay, so I'm in. So it's interesting, isn't it, who our authorities are? And think about that in your own life. Who are the ones that tell you what to think and how do we follow in line? The reason I tell you that is it's so important with our mind to know we have to engage with the different parts as a person of faith, not just one, but these four parts in this. This is why, interestingly you said, because I didn't know what was going to say this morning, but I remember a few years ago in this church, I wrote a letter for Christmas Eve because I was aware that people come and they think we're kind of crazy. And I wrote about what Marcus Borg had said about how our faith grows. He said, we all believe in, like these young people right here, they have a concrete, pre-critical view of the world. It's just the way it is. God's up here, we're here, there's a place down there, flowers grow, the clouds are in the sky, and this very concrete view of the world. It's pre-critical, and that's what it should be. I'd be quite worried if it wasn't. We need to be pre-critical. Then we must move, all of us in our faith journey, to a critical phase, to question. What does this mean? Why is this written that way? How does this fit in what I believe? To then move to what's called post-critical naivete. Post-critical. naivete, that honors this movement that says these questions help us understand. And faith is not about the facts of the story, the Christmas story, but the truth of the story. That God does something in the person of Jesus and comes alive in our bodies. And so it's that movement of pre-critical, critical, post-critical that again invites us to engage our mind in this faith process. And it is writers all the way along that have helped me realize that if we're not doing that, we could get ourselves and indeed our world in very big trouble. Now, interestingly enough, we're coming to a time, as William said, in the faith world, the world religious community, is we're realizing that lots of people can use their mind and their faith, and they can be critical and judgmental and analytical in a way that makes them actually arrogant and racist and homophobic, and they're using their mind. And so the thing that we're realizing is that so many of us live in our heads. How do we get to that place where we're in our soul? And so the beautiful long Psalm 139 is one of the first texts I preached on. It'll be at my funeral when you're there. Psalm 139 talks about God knowing us, knowing me, knowing you, searching. That word, the etymology of that word could be this: to excavate. That is, God digs, excavates to us. Not to be a judge of us, but to love us. And the word knowing has three ways of understanding this. Here goes the brain. If you don't like it, it is daydream, because you should daydream. Here's the thing. You can know someone, and you can know something by observing it. I'm observing what's going on, and I know it, and I take it in. Good 5 on the Enneagram, good observing all of this stuff. The second way of knowing is to be in relationship with someone, to know Kathy, to engage with Kathy, to know someone. And the third way the Bible talks about knowing is sex. And so in the biblical, when we were at seminary, it would be funny, we'd say, I'd like to get to know you. And they'd say, in the biblical sense? But there's 3 kind of ways. One's observing, one's a relationship, and with the other, the last one is intimacy. And so this intimacy in these 3 ways of knowing is how God knows us: observing, relationship, and actual intimacy with us, if you will. This is how this works in relationships. It was, what day was it? Sunday. I flew from Vermont to Washington, D.C. to meet up with my roommate from Princeton Theological College. I had not seen him in 28 years. I got off the plane, walked down through the airport. There was Bill. Bill pops up, I hug him, and it's as though I had been getting out of the room for 1 minute. We started talking. We knew each other. We talked about our divorces. We talked about our work. We talked about our friends. We talked about our ideas and our church. Do you know anyone in your life like that? Who you know them, you know, you can be apart, and you get back and you know them. There's a deep knowing. I hadn't seen him in 28 years. And we knew each other again. That's the kind of knowing. And that's the kind of relationship God has with you and I. God, we can disappear, but God is always there to pick it up where we dropped off. Secondly, I'm sitting there and my phone goes off, ping, Garth, 12 o'clock. I completely forgot that Garth, one of my mentors in life, happened to be in Calgary for lunch. And so he's 81 years old, one of the finest guys that worked with me in my life. I meet him for lunch. We sit down the street here, and immediately we're engaged in ideas. And we engaged about quantum physics and theology and how science, just those people. Do you have anybody in your life like that just you know? That's the relationships that are so important about knowing. The other kind of knowing is this. I had an awful week this week for lots of other reasons, but one in particular. A friend of mine's mother, who's been ill for 4 years waiting for her to die, hasn't eaten solid food since last Christmas. Last Saturday morning, finally died after a vigil. And truth be known, they were quite happy about this final ending after 4 years. She flies from Toronto to Calgary and meets her husband, and they have a conversation, they have a great meal, wake up the next morning. She drives him he drives her to work. And as he's driving back home, something happened and he had a heart attack and he drove right into a tree. The tree fell on him and he's dead. Saturday, a mother dies. Tuesday morning, a husband dies. Pieces. I go and I meet with them and with her in conversation, and we talk about the. And then she says, with a certain knowing, she said, "I know my mom and my husband are together. I can't explain it, but I know they are at peace." Now, there's a knowing that comes when doesn't even make sense in your brain, but you know in your soul that indeed all shall be well and there is peace. And that is the kind of knowing that you know at the core of your being, your soul. You have one, we all do, because we are souls. And you'll have moments when you know. And believe it or not, through tears, she could smile and say, "I know." Is it going to be hell? Yes. But she knows in that moment. I had a day not long ago. I was up at night. Anybody sleep through the night? I'm discovering nobody does. So I couldn't sleep. I got up, and this is the truth. I came down the stairs, I went to the bookshelf, and I went like this, plunk, plunk. I pulled out this book called The Untethered Soul. I go, and I open it, and I start to read it, and it talks about how you wake up in the night, and your mind is racing. And all of these things are happening. It talks about how our mind is chatter, right? Chatter, chatter, chatter. We're judging, critiquing, explaining, fixing, controlling, and trying to do all of this stuff because our mind cannot stop. And invites us in this book to move away from our head down to excavate to the soul we have. And indeed, I did that night. You see, the trick is, and you can call it a trick or the lifelong journey, is to that place where we don't try to escape life. We actually descend into our soul, which is where life is, which is where God is. Now, my good friend and mentor, Richard Rohr, was in a video I saw this week we looked at a couple of weeks ago on a Monday night. It's called Stillness. Type in Stillness, Richard Rohr will pop up, and watch this video. It's 1 hour and 1 minute that'll change your life. Here's what he says at the end, okay? He says, we have a religion that says the third commandment is love the Lord, do not take the Lord's name in vain, okay? What he says is that we got it wrong. We think that means don't swear, or don't take God's name in vain that way. What it means to take God's name in vain is the word vain is Venice, which is emptiness. So what he's saying is, the rabbis say, is this. Here's the thing. To take God's name in emptiness is a sin. And then he says the Hebrew people have a way of looking at God's name. And God's name for the Hebrew people, this is the old way old people do these things like me, like write on boards like this. God's name is Yahweh in the Bible, Hebrew Bible. And the people said God's name is so sacred you can't say it. You cannot say it. And so in Hebrew, they know that what they do is they take out the vowels, and God's name becomes YHWH, Yahweh. He says, what we realize when you say this name, Yahweh, it's like breath. It's Yahweh. And Rohr says, so the interesting thing for the Hebrew people and for all of us is that the very first thing we do when we come into the world is we say God's name, Yahweh. And the very last thing we do, all of us in our life, will say God's name, we'll say, and we will die. And he said, what's so wonderful in this is you can't think that. All you can do is breathe. And it is that breath, that gives us the union, the intimacy, the, the union of two coming together as one. And so it's that you can't think that. All you can do is breathe it. And when you do, all those pieces come together in a peace that passes understanding. And what Rohr says is this: it's so democratic of God to say, it's not about the doctrines, not about the right words or right actions. It's all about simply and it's in our breath and returning and excavating to your soul and mine that a peace comes. So, I'm going to not ask you to write a thing on those cards. I'm going to ask you to do something deeply profound, to breathe. And Bruce might play a bit of music. You can listen to whatever, but you got 2 minutes, and here's the homework. Breathe. 2 minutes. But in that 2 minutes, you might just simply breathe out and in, and out and in, and may touch your very soul. Be still. May we trust the mystery and try not to explain God, but allow yourself to fall in love with God. For God has already fallen in love with you. Trust this great news. We are loved, forgiven, and set free. Thanks be to God. Amen.